words of Sherry Woodbury. Let us enter this sacred sanctuary the way a soft infant enters the bright world, squinting in wonder, holding to another, taking it all in. Let us open all our senses and let our synapses spark one connection after another as we make sense of the world and find joy with each other and follow the instinct to play. I invite you to rise in body or spirit to join our voices in our opening hymn number 318, We Would Be One.
Please lay on or prolong.
I'm doing church. Could you just get me something little to eat? Thanks.
Please remain standing as Ken Hart lights our chalice. In the voice of Beatrice Hitchcock, the flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. It is an everlasting flame for this community. It offers its warmth to those who are cold. It provides light to those who would see. It purifies and transforms this sanctuary into sacred space, this congregation into sacred community. May its flame burn true and high and strong. The stream. Wait for it. The stream, a Sufi story. A stream, from its course in the far-off mountains, passing through every kind and description of countryside, at last reached the sands of the desert. Just as it had crossed every other barrier, the stream tried to cross this one, but found that as fast as it ran into the sand.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not sharing my screen with someone.
Okay,
Can I-
let's just start over again.
Sorry. And I'm gonna need to be co-host.
Oh, I can tell.
This is how the sausage is made.
Proof of sausage, trichinosis.
That's what Johnny Cash is for.
Yeah, how's everyone doing?
Maybe say it from
Can you speak it into that? Dave, please make Dan co-host. Into your microphone.
I'm saying, please make Dan co-host?
Yes.
Okay. Are we good?
No, we're not co-host.
Please make Dan co-host. You got it yet?
No.
Dave, this is a message for you. Please make Dan co-host.
Brian,
The only alternative is I could log off and log in as a church board, but, all right, maybe Zoom people aren't gonna see this.
Oh dear, good.
Do you wanna start at the beginning?
Sure. The stream, a Sufi story. A stream from its course in the far-off mountains, passing through every kind and description of countryside, at last reached the sands of the desert. Just as it had crossed every other barrier, the stream tried to cross this one, but found that as fast as it ran into the sand, its waters disappeared. It was convinced, however, that its destiny was to cross this desert, and yet there was no way. Now, a hidden voice, coming from the desert itself, whispered, "The wind crosses the desert, and so can the stream." The stream objected that the wind could fly, and this was why it could cross a desert. By hurtling in your own accustomed way, you cannot get across. You will either disappear or become a marsh. You must allow the wind to carry you over to your destination. But how could this happen? By allowing yourself to be absorbed in the wind. This idea was not acceptable to the stream. After all, it had never been absorbed before. It did not want to lose its individuality. And once having lost it, how was one to know that one's identity could ever be regained? The wind, said the sand, performs this function. It takes up water, carries it over the desert, and then lets it fall again. How can I know that this is true? If so, and if you do not believe it, you cannot become more than a quagmire. But can I not remain the same stream that I am today? You cannot in either case remain so, the whisper said. When it heard this, echoes began to arise in the thoughts of the stream. Dimly it remembered a state in which it, or some part of it, had been held in the arms of a wind. And the stream raised its vapor into the welcoming arms of the wind, which gently and easily bore it upward and along, letting it fall softly as rain once it reached the roof of a mountain many, many miles away, where it then became a River. And Reverend Jane is going to say a few words, and Reverend Jane will be back in the pulpit 2 weeks from now.
This morning, I offer gratitude to our beloved Ostara. Today is Ostara's last day of leading worship after 15 years of having served as a worship associate. That is 15 years of leading worship, working tirelessly through our lay-led summer months, and assisting ministers with their own Sunday worship, not to mention all of the behind-the-scenes work. That is 15 years of insight, wisdom, and knowledge that she has bestowed upon this beloved church community. What a true blessing. It takes a special kind of vulnerability to come up here and do what she has done. Ostara, you have taught me so much about ritual and liturgy, and in that you are a star. And for that, I am forever grateful. You are a true artist. Let your light forever shine. Thank you.
Please remain seated for our prayer hymn number 391, Voice Still and Small. In the silence that follows the spoken prayer, you're invited forward to light a candle for whatever you hold in your heart this morning. With the words of Laura Horton Ludwig, we lift up this prayer. Spirit of life and love, light within and without, mystery from which we have all emerged, within which we live and die. Be with us now, as we allow ourselves to drop into the silence and stillness at the center of our being. As people of faith, we seek to live in a spirit of love, a spirit of community, justice, and peace. And yet, in so many corners of the world, both far and near, we see divisiveness and hate. If we look deep within ourselves, perhaps we will even find those shadow energies there too. We struggle to respond to the outer world and our inner dramas in ways that manifest love. At times we may fear that love will not be strong enough. At times we may question whether love really is at the root of all things in this world with so much struggle and suffering and discord. We may struggle to hold on to our faith in love, knowing that if all things come from the one source we proclaim, that source must somehow hold hate as well as love. violence as well as peace, evil as well as good. This is the mystery within which we live and die. These are the questions that haunt our days and nights. And yet we are not without hope. Our struggles and our questions testify to our longing for peace, for love. Our very longings are born out of that mystery we dare to address as spirit of life and love. In the stillness and silence of our own heart, we read the imprint of love, created not by our own will, but planted there for us to discover. By what or whom we cannot know. And yet it is there, a clue, a talisman, a beacon, a light within. May it keep hope alive, even as we dwell in mystery. May it guide us all as we seek to act wisely and well. May it help us to be vessels of compassion for one another and for our world. Spirit of life and love, light within and without, be with us now as we allow ourselves to drop into the silence and stillness at the center of our being. Amen.
Oh, come on, let's go.
2 final candles, one for the joys and concerns of those beloveds joining us virtually, and one for all else that we hold in our hearts and minds this morning. If your heart is hurting, know that your community is here to help, as is Reverend Jane. Please reach out with any needs. Paul Dalswell wrote, "The offering we take each Sunday is an opportunity to recommit to this place and to these people. It is as much a ritual as singing together, lighting our chalice, or reciting a unison affirmation. It is a reminder of that form of love we call generosity. It is how we show that we believe it is important to worship together, to help our community, and to say yes to the values of our faith. For those of you watching the service online, you may contribute to a virtual offering plate using the donate button on our website or by mailing a check to the church office. Will the ushers please come forward? Do for our church community and its wider concerns, we give thanks. Our 2 readings this morning are from Worship That Works by Wayne Arneson and Kathleen Rollins. Rooted in profound human experiences of awe, wonder, fear, and family, the impulse to worship is an original response to finding ourselves alive. Worship as devotion, as storytelling, as metaphorical ritual, and as a response to the mystery of life has played its role in human communities through rites, liturgical forms, and traditions. Almost by definition, the first thing most participants in worship come searching for is the ancient, the familiar, the experience outside of time. We also come in search of transformation, from daily experience to transcendent experience, from our ordinary seeing to extraordinary vision, from our routine life to unpredictable means. We believe that there is something that matters even more than the content of worship that is crucial to how a worshiping community understands itself. That something is the attitude a community brings to worship. What do they think they're doing when they attend worship services? I invite you to rise and embody your spirit to join our voices in hymn number 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. My topic today is how to participate in a church service. Well, that takes some nerve. I'm exercising a bit of the prerogative of the pulpit this morning, but all any of us can do is speak from our own experience, and that's what I'll be doing. Just getting in my 2 cents worth. We'll walk through a typical Sunday service, reflecting on the meaning and intent of each element, and I'll sprinkle in a few personal thoughts, and yes, even opinions. These opinions are just mine. You can take them or leave them. So, it's Sunday morning, and you've chosen to come here. I'm glad you're here. Of all the things you could be doing on your weekend and at the very beginning of the week, you've chosen to be here. This always amazes me. You see, when I was growing up in a Lutheran church, not terribly unlike this one, you went to church on Sunday morning to praise God, confess your sins to God and be forgiven, and generally offer yourself up in service to the one true divinity. There was nothing more important in life, according to the teachings of the church of my childhood and youth. I'm sure this sounds familiar to many of you from your own upbringing. The point is, the reason for going to church on Sunday was absolutely compelling, a necessary part of being a good person, and of course, going to heaven someday. The Unitarian Universalist faith doesn't preach these kinds of reasons for butts and pews on Sunday. Yet here you are. To me, it's nothing short of wondrous that you've chosen to come here to realign as you start your week. So it's Sunday morning, and we're ready for our weekly sacred reset. How do we start? We arrive here at the door of this building from the world of traffic and all the myriad and disparate things in our lives. Opening the door and crossing the threshold to the narthex, we begin to make a shift. We rejoin this community. The narthex is the space of welcoming. You greet those you know, put on your name tag for those who don't know your name, and introduce yourself to anyone you're meeting for the first time. Notice how this space feels when you come in. Entering the sanctuary represents another level of shift into sacred space. Notice how this shift feels. At this point, you can continue to engage with others if you want, or begin to settle into sacred space, inner and outer. This sanctuary is very large for our in-person size, both long and wide. Optionally, you're invited upon entry to move up and in. While we do well to remember that COVID isn't entirely behind us, we're no longer in a pandemic with its requirements of social distancing. But these pandemic-era habits die hard. There are some good reasons to consider moving up and in, including enhancing the sense of community, feeling closer, and having the sanctuary not look and feel sparsely populated. This sanctuary's capacity is supposed to be, how many? 175? I think it's something like that. And when we spread ourselves out, the space not only looks sparsely populated, it sounds sparsely populated. It's not hard, it is harder to unite our voices in song when we're spread across a space this size. On the other hand, you may have perfectly good reasons to sit apart, including things like immune concerns, or just having a need or desire for a little cushion when you're here. And that's okay. So, know that you're invited to move up and in, and do as the spirit or some practical reality moves you. As you enter the sanctuary, the prelude might already be playing, or it might begin after you're seated. This is not the formal beginning of the service, and you're free to still be milling. But it's a cue that we'll be beginning soon, and you'll want to be seated and ready soonish. For some of us, the prelude might mean it's time to begin moving inward spiritually. This is where I was headed a number of weeks ago, as our music director and musician, Gabby, brought the prelude, rendered beautifully on the violin, to a close, and the room erupted into appreciative applause. I experienced this as an unexpected jolt. Stemming from both my religious upbringing and my experience in certain kinds of pagan ritual, my personal sensibility holds a distinction between liturgical music and performance, and I've always been a little ill at ease with applauding liturgical music. There are many ways we can respond to musical energy and its culmination in sacred space. We can soak it in. We can join our personal and collective energy with that of the music via movement or in some other way. We can even participate in sending the energy off into the universe. I won't elaborate on that. To me, the space between the prelude and the gathering music is a time to be carried by the music that's ending to a place of readiness for what's about to begin. That said, I know that for many who walk through our doors, bursting into applause is the proper way to show appreciation for for the musician's performative gift bestowed on those of us in the pews. And we are grateful for it. So yes, this is one of those opinions I mentioned. Again, it's my perspective. Take it or leave it, and I've belabored it enough. So let's move on to the gathering chant. The gathering music. We used to call it the gathering chant. This is the formal beginning of the service. It's a call to physically gather, a beckoning into the body of our gathered community, and a beckoning to inner sacred space. We've used different gathering chants over the years, and some of them place more emphasis on the call to physically gather. Others place more emphasis on the call inward. With the gathering music, those leading worship, usually the minister and worship associate, process in. A sense of movement is evoked, along with a sense that something is about to begin. When I'm in the congregation, I experience a sense of expectancy. Notice what changes in you and how the energy around you shifts during this procession and as the service leaders take their place. This chant is also the first time we get to join our voices together in song. It's our first act together as a congregation on Sunday morning. I encourage you to notice the feeling of our collective energy gathering and to practice using your voice as a devotional act. The service leader steps to the pulpit and delivers the call to worship. These are the first spoken liturgical words of our service. We're called into this place in this hour, and we invoke the sacred. We intend these words to be a call, and the congregation to respond inwardly to being called. Listen. Listen as a devotional act. And from this receptive place of listening, we're invited to lift our voices in singing the opening hymn. For a second time, we join our voices, this time perhaps with more gusto. We rise in body or spirit, actively lifting ourselves up, offering our energy. This hymn is often joyful, not always. Either way, it's another piece indicative of a new beginning, the start of a new cycle. If you're not a singer, sing anyway. Or, alternatively, help raise up and hold the energy in your own way. Next, the chalice lighting. This is the final beginning piece. You may have noticed that in the course of our liturgy, we traverse several layers of beginning. Think of this one as the capstone of the beginning. A congregation person lights the chalice, a different person each week. Here, one person performs a symbolic action, and the rest of the congregation, the rest of us, participates by observing and holding this act in attention. This is a very powerful part of our service. I encourage you to specially train your attention as the candle is lit. Look as an act of devotion. In words from the worship theory section of the UUA website, the flaming chalice is the beacon of hope, the light of truth, the warmth of love, the container of community, and more. Our Sunday services are not the only time we light a chalice. We often light a chalice at the start of meetings, discussion groups, and other gatherings. I encourage you also in these settings to treat the chalice lighting as a holy act, one where you're called to reel your attention in from distractions and focus it on the sacred act of lighting and on the glow of the flame. If you're the person leading the chalice lighting for the meeting, I encourage you to pause for a moment to make sure everyone in this space is ready and that you have their attention before initiating the chalice lighting ritual. Getting back to Sunday services, next in the flow of our liturgy, we respond to the chalice lighting, and indeed to all that went before. With this sung response, we're joining our voices, and not just with the group gathered here, but metaphorically with all that dwell below the skies. We call for all life to join with us in celebrating existence, and to join us in hope, faith, and in calling for universal peace and goodwill. Then we move to our story for all ages, or time for all ages. Usually we have a story. In our services, we use a variety of kinds of stories. But generally speaking, we don't use the phrase story for all ages as a euphemism for children's story, nor is it a children's sermon. What's the difference? The story is not a simplified version of a sermon, nor simply a moral lesson. If a lesson is apparent, fine, but don't exercise your thinking brain too hard. Let this narrative piece work in you as a story works in you as a whole. Take in the story as story. We're not divided into children and adults in how we integrate a story. Like we do after the chalice lighting, we sing our response to the story for all ages. When we have children's and youth religious education, this is the point where the children and youth would exit the sanctuary to go to their classes. For many years, we sang Go Now in Peace. A little more than a year ago, we switched to The More We Get Together. This particular song was Stephen's suggestion, and I'll admit I was a little skeptical before we tried it, of a song that I associated with, say, 2nd and 3rd grade music class. But it's fun, lighthearted, and true. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. First time we sang it, I was easily sold. And then things get distinctly quieter. It's time for our prayer hymn. At this point, we shift definitively in the direction of stillness. We mingle our voices again, this time moving into ourselves together. The prayer is the liturgy of the heart and the heart of the service. It falls more or less at the midway point of our hour together, in the center. We hear the words of the spoken prayer, take them into our heart, respond with feeling, and send that out. Then we fall into silence. In their book, Worship That Works, Wayne Arneson and Kathleen Rollins write, when a congregation enters a deeper silence together, the feeling in the room is palpable. The silence is rich and dense, as if all had just dived into a refreshingly clear lake on a hot summer day. Does this sound like an experience that's familiar to you? In the silence, we have an opportunity to listen to our own inner voice. We're also offered the opportunity to come forward and light a candle. This part of the service might especially touch those who crave a liturgy put into movement and engaging with a tangible symbol. Now, let's get down to a practical nitty-gritty for a moment. Where do you plant your candle in the dish of sand? Or another way of putting it is, how can you be helpful to the next person in the placement of your candle? Our previous minister, Reverend Susan, advised placing the candles back to front, and I still subscribe to this. The reason is ensuring that others can easily situate their candles without risk of burning themselves. I offer this as my own perspective and leave you to your choice. I'll concede that other places might distribute the candles better and be more aesthetically pleasing. But for myself, I put safety first in this instant. The prayer and silent meditation are followed by the invitation to offering. I'm not going to say much about this, except to reminisce a little about something I miss. In the church I grew up in, the offering was taken with a quiet rhythm of passing the plates while the piano played softly. The ushers proceeded down the aisle, handing the plate to the first person at every other row of pews. The plates were passed person to person, all the way down one row. And the congregant at the far end passed the plate back to the person behind them, and the plate was passed person to person back to the middle, where the usher received it and passed it to the next row. I've accepted that there's probably no way of replicating the rhythmic movement of this ritual in our services. We're too spread out, and many among us don't make our donations by physically placing money in the plate each Sunday. But I miss it. On the other hand, we do get the soft music. We then move on to the most verbal part of the service, the readings and the sermon, with a hymn in between. This liturgy of the word begins with our readings for the day, which lead into the sermon. Also, as a lead in to the sermon, we sing another hymn. Here I'm going to stop out for a moment. I'm going to take the opportunity to address that ever-important question which applies to all the hymns. What if you feel like you can't sing a particular hymn or a line of a hymn for theological reasons? No problem. Feel free to opt out of verbalization here. If you don't want to sing but would like to participate in a supportive way, you can always hum or simply help hold the space. And we come to the sermon. As congregants, we engage in the practice of deep listening, open to the possibility that what we hear will change us. The unwinding of our service begins with our closing hymn, the final time we join our voices together, and then we receive the benediction. What does this mean, this word? You don't need to know Latin to know what this is. What is the bene portion of this word, B-E-N-E? Good, I'm hearing good, good or well. And what does the dict relate to, as in dictation or dictum or any of these dict words? I'm hearing, but I'm not hearing distinct.
Speak.
Speak. Okay, well, we'll go with speak. Yes, that's good. So benediction means something like speak well or good words. Another way of putting it might be to give a blessing, or it can be a charge to the congregation. The benediction is a final gift to us, a gift of words. Our job is to receive it. In tandem with the benediction, the chalice is extinguished. And finally, the light from our chalice is carried out beyond the walls of our sanctuary. Here we enact our renewed readiness to go out into the world carrying our light. We extinguish the flame we've kept for this immediate gathering. But this common light travels with us as we go our separate ways. I encourage you to keep this in your heart and mind as you exit the sanctuary and as you leave the church. Maybe even call it to mind throughout the week. And finally, we come to the postlude, or exiting music. This is our cue to exit. Go down to coffee hour and go forth into our week's activities. May it be so. Please rise and body your spirit to join our voices in hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us. In the words of Gordon B. McKeeman, the worship of the gathered community is now ended. Go in peace, go in joy, go in love to share the ongoing worship of the community in dispersion. Carry with you what is precious to us all: reverence for all life, beauty that displays itself in love, deep, abiding peace. Amen.